Good afternoon. My name is Winona. It's unfortunate that we have to be here this afternoon under these circumstances. The city needs to stop aiding in the discrimination and systematic racism of Black and brown folks. As long as they continue to ignore the cries of the people for change, they are complicit in upholding these discriminatory practices by RPD with murdering and brutalizing Black and brown folks with zero accountability. We are tired of city government aiding in the practice of discrimination, covering up murders and police brutality of Black and brown citizens in this community. There has been enough conversation regarding reform. The time is now for those in leadership to take action. We need you to stand up for the job that you were elected to do by putting in the work needed for reform and change, or get out of office so that someone else willing to change the system can do so. Human decency is a right and should be recognized and treated as such. Thank you. And I would also like to thank the lawyers for the work that they have done on this case and the support that you have given to us. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Emily Good, and I'm a legal observer with the National Lawyers Guild Rochester. Police have targeted legal observers with pepper balls, tear gas, and false arrests at protests, pointing us out before taking aim, to interfere with our ability to document their human rights abuses and unlawful actions against protesters, journalists, street medics, and fellow legal observers. This state violence is business as usual for the police, who have for decades routinely violated the human rights of our community members, especially Black activists and organizers. We need radical action to end police violence in our community now. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Reynaldo de Guzman. For the past 9 months, I've filmed this community mourn an innocent man slain, while the same department responsible for their anguish kicked their teeth in as they bowed their heads in prayer. For context, I'm an observer complying with law enforcement and organizers alike, never agitating or interacting. I'm silent in the field with my camera, acutely aware of everything going on around me in order to do my job. To be blunt, what I've witnessed has been nothing short of abject terror, carnage, and unwarranted brutalization. In no way am I exaggerating when I label how the RPD, Monroe County sheriffs, and state troopers have conducted themselves as rampant, belligerent, and on multiple occasions, vengeful. After capturing a violent arrest of a young Black woman who was screaming, "I can't breathe," as one of her 5 arresting officers held their knee on her upper spine. I was walking away to do a battery change when an officer yelled, "A media badge and a free pass," and proceeded to shoot me in the base of my neck. The pepper ball split my neck open and the chemical agent seeped into the wound. I wasn't able to turn my head left for the next week. My colleagues from national news outlets who have captured protests in Portland, New York City, Kenosha, Minnesota, have told me this department's response was by far the most grossly disproportionate to the lack of aggression shown by demonstrators. When we describe the RPD's response to demonstrators, we're not talking about the defense of personnel, buildings, or businesses. The response I observed and captured on my camera from a department that should have been on their hands and knees begging for forgiveness from the people they were sworn to protect was instead unmitigated aggression, violent military-grade tactics, and weaponry deployed on undergrads, high school students, nurses, construction workers, teachers, elderly clergy, men and women in wheelchairs holding umbrellas to shield them from chemical warfare. I saw small children start their day chanting "My Life Matters" while dancing and eating pizza, then end it crying and screaming into their parents' chest as they fled from tear gas. While the world watched us with bated breath, this city's elected officials and its law enforcement didn't hesitate to pull the trigger. The world has watched our broken government double down on the same inhumane practices that landed us on the world stage in the first place. I've witnessed people lose eyes. I've watched as their bones were crushed, skulls fractured, and as a result, many, including myself, slide deeper into debilitating levels of depression and PTSD. Unfortunately, we're beyond any precipice that could have redeemed the sins of this government and have plunged past any conceivable reform. The RPD, Monroe County Sheriffs, and New York State Troopers have made Rochester the face of police brutality and terror throughout this country. The dignity of our city and of our nation cannot be salvaged until justice is imposed on this $100 million engine of murder and violence. This unprecedented document shows that we don't suffer from a few bad apples, but are plagued by a rotten tree whose roots have poisoned our community for decades. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Lore McSpadden. During the course of the last year, the whole nation, and indeed the world, bore witness to the militarization of the Rochester Police Department. International press covered the violence that the City of Rochester and the Rochester Police Department used against residents who were speaking out against the systemic racism that gave rise to the murders of Daniel Prude and more recently Tyshawn Jones by officers of the Rochester Police Department. The murders of these two young Black men and the excessive force used against myself and the many other protesters did not occur in a vacuum. Not at all. Rather, they were simply the visible manifestations of the culture of racism and excessive force that permeates the Rochester Police Department and the greater Rochester area. We are here before you not simply as individuals, but as representatives of the countless people who have been brutalized, traumatized, and unjustly treated by the City of Rochester and the Rochester Police Department. We are here before you because too many lives have been lost, and the worth of people has been too long disrespected and devalued. These events in Rochester are the inevitable results of centuries of systemic racism and classism, locally and nationally. The history of policing in the United States is intertwined with the enslavement of Black people and the prioritization of the possessions of the wealthy over the needs of the poor. The militarization of the Rochester Police Department has resulted in crimes against individuals, communities, and humanity, and has disproportionately been wielded towards the city's Black and brown residents. What we are seeing, what this complaint brings to light, is the result of neglecting communities and community support systems, and instead funding a violent police force that has shown no interest in protecting and no ability to serve. We are here to hold those who are responsible for these violations of human rights accountable, and to bring forth the changes that are necessary towards defunding the police, refunding the community, and ending systemic injustices. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Devorah Chapman. I'm a mother, a two-time combat veteran, a product and a citizen of Rochester, New York. Since returning home, I've been known around town for either doing comedy, performing hip hop, mentoring children in a performance developmental camp called MIBG, and even briefly coaching youth basketball. So I have a few questions for everybody to think on, and they are: Who do we call for help when the Rochester Police Department, like a lot of others in the country, is filled with racist cops who see our skin color as a weapon or a criminal act? Who do we look to for justice when the system of justice overlooks these modern-day lynchings starring unarmed or mentally challenged men and women of color? As a veteran, I can relate to these officers in having signed up, possibly risking life and limb in service, but one thing I cannot relate to, however, is the lack of training they have, especially in neighborhoods that they don't reside in nor relate to. Prior to my first deployment, which was to Iraq, we were trained in the culture of the people whose homeland we were patrolling and ultimately intruding upon. We were given rules and regulations, rules of engagement, even in wartime situations. For example, if a car was speeding towards me, my training would be to disable the vehicle first. The last measure would be to shoot to kill. The RPD has a tendency, however, of killing first and figuring out what happened later. As a soldier, I was made to recite the Soldier's Creed over and over again because it was our way of life. To me, the most important line in the creed is also what I recited when I enlisted into the Army. It says, "I will defend the Constitution against all enemies, both foreign and domestic." That being said, I felt obligated to join and protest with my people, even though we still have to beg to be recognized as more than 3/5 of a man under the same Constitution. The RPD also has an oath, or their law enforcement code of ethics. This code of ethics consists of 4 short paragraphs, 2 of which pertain directly to my statement, and can be found on page 2 of RPD's Rules and Regulations Handbook. The 2 paragraphs that I would like to read for you from the RPD's Code of Ethics are paragraphs 1 and 3, and they read as follows. Paragraph 1, as a law enforcement officer, my fundamental duty is to serve mankind, to safeguard lives and property, to protect the innocent against deception, the weak against oppression and intimidation, and the peaceful against violence or disorder, and to respect the constitutional rights of all persons to liberty, equality, and justice. And I'm going to interject by saying that peacefully protesting is certainly a citizen's First Amendment right under the U.S. Constitution. The third paragraph reads, I will never act officiously, and officiously means in a way that shows you have too high of an importance of your own self and are too eager to tell people what to do. So I will never act officiously or permit personal feelings, prejudices, animosities, or friendships to influence my decisions, with no compromise for crime and with relentless prosecution of criminals. I will enforce the law courteously and appropriately without fear or favor, malice or ill will, never employing unnecessary force. It says never employing unnecessary force or violence and never accepting gratuities. It's not tear gassing and shooting peaceful protesters with rubber bullets, not unnecessary use of force. It's not pepper spraying a 9-year-old and then telling her she's acting like a child, not unnecessary use of force. It's not doing a push-up on a naked man's neck while he's wearing a spit guard and handcuffs, not unnecessary use of force. So in order for, I'm sorry, excuse me, because I'm kind of caught up emotional because these are things that we shouldn't have to keep saying over and over again for years and years and years to come. But in order for things to change and change to come, the RPD will have to hold itself to a higher standard without being above the law. They should try harder to win the hearts and minds of the people instead of racially profiling people of color. They should start acknowledging when their officers are wrong and punish them as such. You can't change what you can't acknowledge or what you don't acknowledge. So that's why racists are so quick to say, forget about slavery, forget about Jim Crow, redlining, and the attack on Black Wall Street and all of the other things that hurt us, because history can only repeat itself if we forget, and we will not forget. Power to the people.
Hello, my name is Emily McIntyre, and I am here today because it took decades of consistent murdering of Black people up until Daniel Prude and the overt brutalization at subsequent protests for white protesters like me to even begin to start to see for ourselves the excessive violence and harm that the Rochester Police Department is capable of. We have experienced firsthand but a mere fraction of the brutality that Rochester police officers routinely execute against Black and brown people every day in our city. If this is what they do to protesters on camera in front of the whole world, what are they doing to people off of camera? I want to see the Rochester Police Department defunded and disbanded and reparative actions be taken for the most affected communities.
Hello, my name is Dynasty Bugs, and the reason I'm here today is to speak and voice my concerns about the Rochester Police Department using excessive force. About a year ago, I was abused by the police department and pepper sprayed by officers. This resulted in no discipline at all for them. And then I look on the news and I see the same officer's face again, pepper spraying a 9-year-old, also using force against a 10-year-old, and a mother and a 3-year-old child. Every time I've watched any one of those videos, it brings me back to a place that I don't want to be. I start to feel all the emotions, fear, anger, and everything else that comes with it all over again, which is hard to deal with, just knowing that they will never be held accountable, or they haven't been held accountable as of yet, or disciplined for their actions, and are right back on the streets doing the same thing with no care in the world. I feel that there's a racism problem within the Rochester Police Department. I don't feel that they have our best interests as City of Rochester residents, and I don't feel safe no longer with them. I don't feel like they are here to protect and serve us. The RPD needs to know how to deal with people, especially in the Black and Hispanic community. These officers should be held accountable immediately, no matter who they are. As I deal with my emotions and I watch numerous videos of police brutality to women and children, just the excessive force amongst us, I can't see how any real human can watch another human kill or harm and not think that this person should be held accountable. When that doesn't happen, it's like a slap in our face, and the city needs to do better with it, putting this information out and disciplining these officers immediately. Not cover it up, not just say anything to make us go away, just change it.
Good afternoon. My name is Anthony Hall, and as we heard statements from individuals that have been victimized by RPD, I sit before you also in solidarity with these victims and with Rochester and the Prude family. As the songwriter wrote, it's been a long time coming, but I know change is going to come. Today, we file a lawsuit that demands fundamental change in Rochester, in the police department. This change is long overdue and necessary for this community. As Rochester faces new heights, this community demands that RPD and the city officials in this community take action. Some of the demands that we ask is a federal monitor that will look over RPD and require them to do better. If not do better, get rid of them. Our hopes for this class action lawsuit is that RPD will not and cannot have the ability to make another Daniel Prude. This community is hurting and suffering from a barbaric institution. This institution, for hundreds of years across this country, has devastated Black and brown communities. And today, no longer will we stand by. We're standing up. His name is Daniel Prude. His name is Tyshawn Jones. His name is George Floyd. Her name is Breonna Taylor. Thank you.
Oh, my name is Joe Prude. I stand here in solidarity with these individuals that's bringing forth this class action lawsuit. Time is now. Not now, right now. All I can ask is that this action be brought forth, everybody being held accountability for their actions. There should be no excuses, no ifs, no buts, no whats. Time is now. My brother died for no reason. And I can't sit back, and I won't sit back. This pain is starting to be unbearable. I want to see everyone from the mayor, Sandra Dooley, everybody that knew about it, that understood about it, that went on blatantly to cover it up. I want to see them brought forth to justice, because y'all will do it to me.
So I think we can open it up to questions at this point.
This is Berkeley Breen from News 10 NBC. Is okay if I go ahead and ask a question?
Yes.
Okay. So a question for any one of the attorneys who wants to handle this. There are dozens of federal civil rights lawsuits against the RPD. What distinguishes this one from all the others?
Go ahead.
Sure. Many of the other cases that are filed against the RPD also seek systemic reforms. The difference with this case is this is a class action case where the
Elliot, can you hold on for a second? I apologize. We need to see Elliot on our screen. So can we make sure we see Elliot and then start over again, Elliot, please?
Katie, I think the speaker in the room is muted. Can you unmute that on Elliot's computer?
Thank you for the question, Berkeley. Now, the difference in this lawsuit is that it's class action. The scale is different. The number of plaintiffs involved is different. But we're seeking many of the same things that we've been seeking for years, systemic reforms. This lawsuit is different because it lays out the history, going back decades, more detailed than any other lawsuit that's ever been filed against the Rochester Police Department. The difference is that we've gathered more stories than any other lawsuit has ever gathered and laid it out in a comprehensive way to show that based on the narrative that we put together and based on the numbers, if you read the lawsuit, the numbers that we were able to show based on the RPD's own data that they've published, the history of systemic racism and use of excessive force against people of color in the city of Rochester is undeniable.
This is Wendy Wright from Spectrum News. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, Wendy.
I wanted to ask you if you could sort of summarize what your ultimate bottom line here is. It's obviously to, to answer some of the concerns from all these folks who just spoke. But is there a monetary amount you're seeking? What is the ultimate bottom line that you and everybody there is hoping for?
Josh, you want to take that?
Sure. The bottom line is we're seeking change, real change in the police department. That comes in different forms, and what we want to see and what this lawsuit attempts to do, and we hope it will do, is allow the community to have a seat at the table in talking about what real reform in the police department means. So yes, we are seeking monetary relief for the people who have suffered unbelievable injuries at the hands of Rochester police officers. We're seeking broad injunctive relief that will force the police department to do what they seem to be unwilling to do on their own. And we seek to have input from the city and the people who live there about what it means to reimagine policing in Rochester.
Hi, this is Dan Schrack with 13 WAM News. Thank you for inviting us all here today. My question, I suppose, is for one of the lawyers, but maybe whomever wants to answer this. We have heard and had heard last year the phrase defunding quite frequently. And then this afternoon, I believe I heard one of the speakers say that the Rochester Police Department should be disbanded. I'm wondering if I could get reaction as to moving forward. Last week, we saw 3 homicides in the city of Rochester. Moving forward, how would those situations, how would those incidents be handled with new policing?
So, we're not here to answer the question of exactly how the RPD would police going forward. What we know is right now there are deep systemic problems that have been going on here for decades. For going back to the 70s to the 80s, our firm has proven that there is serious misconduct here. In investigative cases, the city has paid millions of dollars to settle these cases, and even now, this is still going. And so something has to change. Something has to give. It is broken, and the RPD does not take police accountability seriously whatsoever. There is no disciplinary system, and that is what we are bringing to the forefront in this lawsuit. This is the time now for change. It's gone on for too long, and something has to give.
And if I can just briefly ask a follow-up, in the lawsuit, it is briefly discussed police reform and how the city has handled the Executive Order 203 to submit to the governor in Albany with 2 closed-door sessions. If anyone can speak on a more broad basis about how the city handled that.
And I think some of our plaintiffs can speak to that as well, but I would say generally that though the governor called for the community to provide input on how to reimagine public safety, not policing, public safety, the city did not welcome community groups in. They didn't ask for input. And tellingly, even though in the pandemic, city council meetings have been live streamed on Zoom, they've been open to the people, the mayor, who had the police accountability board's plan for months, held 2 closed-door sessions, the meetings of which have not been provided to the media, and came up with a toothless plan. There's a lot of aspiring to, hope to, we will produce records as required by the law. I mean, that is the absolute bare minimum. So it's telling that the mayor, who has control over the police department, when given an opportunity to reimagine and when confronted with these deep issues on the world stage, still came up with nothing. The mayor's own plan didn't even call for the termination of officers with known ties to white supremacist groups.
Perfect, thank you. And just for confirmation, you are Katie, correct? Okay, thank you.
This is Gino Finelli from City News. I've just been wondering, we've heard many times over the years, systemic reform, plans for reform. We've seen many documents over the past 50 years or so. What is different about this push for reform that hasn't been done in the past?
Well, I'll try and address some of that. Too many of these cases are looked at in a silo, and history and the broader problems that accompany these horrific incidents where there's Daniel Prude and other people who have been victimized by the police are looked at without that context. And so this case, and I'll say from having worked on a number of cases of a similar magnitude, this case brings history to bear. And I think that when you read the complaint and you see what's gone on in Rochester, and you look at what the police department's done and what it hasn't done in attempting to address these instances, this case stands apart. And we're asking for the court to consider that context and that history when we're talking about reform. It can't be lip service, and it can't be half measures. As any of the people who already spoke have indicated, this is about real change now, and enough is enough. And that couldn't be stronger when you read this complaint and what the people who have been the victims of police brutality in Rochester have experienced.
So what does the ideal outcome look like?
I think the ideal outcome is to allow the community to have real public safety. It's clear when you read what goes on in Rochester that there are people who are not safe in their own communities because of the police. And the police aren't doing their job in terms of keeping them safe. So I think that the ultimate goal is to have the people of Rochester have real voice in developing what it means to have a public safety department, as the complaint talks about. And as the news has talked about, the city has not taken real input from the community, and that would be the first step that needs to be taken.
Thank you.
This is Kate Whitson with the Washington Post. Thanks for inviting us. This obviously isn't a unique problem. We see it throughout police departments throughout the country. I'm trying to get better insight into why you think that Rochester is different or allegedly worse than others. What is at play here culturally that is contributing to the pervasive excessive use of force that you're alleging?
So a big part of what is happening here is that the police force is almost entirely white and does not live in the city. Something like 6.6% of RPD officers live in the city of Rochester. They don't live here, they don't pay taxes here, but they commute in to police the people and protect the property that isn't even theirs. And I think that there's a huge disconnect when you have a city that's predominantly Black and brown people being policed by this outside white police force. And you know, that goes back decades. And coupled with that is this culture of impunity within the department that goes beyond certainly what I have seen in other cases, and we don't want to, it's all problematic, but here, even when officers are on tape, beating people, driving cars at people, at most they're written up for something like not filling out the paperwork for having put a dent in their car. That's what is called discipline here. And ultimately, the chief has authority over whether, even if an officer is determined to have done something wrong, the chief can decide to impose no discipline at all. So this is a sham disciplinary system, and you have a police force that is wholly divorced from the community that they are supposed to be protecting and serving.
Hi, this is Jen Lukey from News 10 NBC. I wanted to ask about the federal monitor. I want to make sure I'm reading it correctly first of all. Is it a federal monitor that you're asking for? And typically when those are appointed, it's after the DOJ has conducted its own investigation and found a pattern of civil rights violations. So can you just clarify on that, what you're hoping for with that request?
Certainly. Ultimately, we're looking for the court to intervene and oversee how the police department is reforming. And that's often done through the appointment of a federal monitor. Federal judges are often too busy to have the daily oversight responsibilities in reforming a police department such as this. There are a number of instances of private lawsuits where the Department of Justice is not the one animating the case, where federal monitors have been appointed, including the stop and frisk litigation in New York City, in which there is still a federal monitor who's overseeing the reforms to ensure that constitutional stops are the practice in the police department. And so, yes, ultimately, the court will need to make a determination before a monitor can be appointed, but we think that there has to be external oversight. The police department has shown for decades that they're unable to police themselves.
Yes, and in those cases then, is it typically someone who is just appointed by the court? Is it a board like it is in those DOJ situations? And how long does that last?
There are different ways that the monitor is made up, as you pointed out. Sometimes it's an individual. They always, of course, have a team that they're working with. Sometimes it's a board. We are open to different suggestions of how that might work and who might be the right person or people to do that. In Rochester, there is a unique board already. It's the Police Accountability Board that has had its power taken away from it. And if that were given back and they were allowed to do their job, that might be the right body to oversee the police department.
This is Kate from the Washington Post again. Cases like this very rarely go to trial. And for those that do, there's massive community support that helps to push them forward. I'm referencing the stop and frisk case that took years, and in part because of the massive community support. What are the plaintiffs doing to organize what I would imagine would be a sustained effort in this situation?
Talking about what?
What are the plaintiffs doing to organize?
To sustain the effort for change and accountability. Absolutely. Come over. Yeah. Stanley will answer the question.
So I think Free the People ROC, Community Justice Initiative, Label ROC Arc of Justice, so many different groups are very uniquely positioned to organize the community, to educate them about what it means to have public safety that is not grounded in violence and policing necessarily, but grounded in mental health resources, actual help when people ask for help. When people call 911, they're calling for help. And unfortunately, the only system we have to respond is the police, and they are very ill-equipped to deal with some of these calls for help. So we are positioned to organize the community, do political education, continue to call for accountability, and do whatever it takes to make sure that this lawsuit isn't something that's done in vain, but instead it's something that really, really creates systemic change and also sets precedents for other cities like Rochester who have a history of police brutality and violence in their communities.
How would members of the public that feel that they do belong to this class actually enter it?
So that would be a good question for Kimberly.
Yeah, well, Stanley, I'll try and field that one. The steps in the litigation that will lead to notice being sent out are many. We're months, if not years, away from that point in the process. Although we intend to move this forward as quickly as we possibly can. And so there will be an opportunity for people in the city or who live around the city who have been victimized by the police to let the lawyers on the case know that they're part of that class.
So if you're months, if not years away from that, sorry, what is the immediate response that you're hoping for? Sorry, Will Cleveland.
Elliot or Katie, do you want to jump in or?
Can you repeat the question?
Josh is outlining you're months, if not years, away from, opening it up, opening the class up. What do you foresee as the immediate litigation that's happening, or the response from the courts, et cetera?
Well, just maybe before Katie comes over, and I don't want to take away our opportunity to answer, but just to clarify, months, if not years away from people notifying the court and notifying us that they're part of the class or believe they are. There are many steps in the litigation that will be happening before then, and I'll turn it over to Katie, who can talk about what the next steps will be.
I mean, I think that's exactly right. So there's a process through the litigation, but frankly, the call is to the city. We filed this lawsuit. We'll be serving it on the mayor, on the city, on the individual defendants, and there'll be an opportunity if they're serious about change to talk about it. But the legal process, the next step will be certifying the class, and we are seeking to represent in this lawsuit. And the plaintiffs here today are speaking on behalf of all individuals who have been harmed by the use of excessive force by the Rochester Police Department in the past 3 years. It's 3 years because that's the legal statute of limitations, the time frame in which you can bring an excessive force suit like we are bringing here. And the reality is that the RPD maintains body-worn camera footage of every civilian interaction. There are no exceptions under their policy for recording when you are interacting with an individual, and it's mandatory that footage of arrests be maintained for 10 years. So it is possible to audit, to access every arrest and every civilian interaction, certainly during the past 3 years, caught on body-worn camera by the RPD. So that is something that we would be looking for as well.
Will Cleveland from the Democrat and Chronicle here. I want to ask some questions of some of the plaintiffs. Specifically, why are you guys joining in on an effort like this when you've seen, a year's worth of protests that haven't led to many of the reforms that you've called for? So why are you optimistic, or why do you think this is the next potential grounds for something like this?
So I would say this is connected to a larger strategy of employing multiple tactics to ensure that we are safe and that the people who have harmed us are held accountable. The lawsuit is part of, the long history of organizing and abolition in Rochester, and so many different people coming together to demand change and justice. We think of the attorneys represented on this law firm and the expertise they're lending to us in the city. We think of the journalists, folks from NLG, our own community members and organizers who are so connected to police violence and the harm that's been done. We're hopeful because it's connected to a series of multiple tactics and it's not a standalone strategy. We also want to ensure that Lovely Warren, Todd Baxter, and elected officials know that the world is watching and we have documented all their abuses, and we are here to fight tooth and nail for justice. So we're very hopeful based on that.
And then for the attorneys, why isn't the Rochester Police Locust Club named in this lawsuit? Why are they kept separate from what we're seeing with elected officials and with, the hundreds of police officers who are named? Sorry, did you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, we could hear you. I think we were trying to figure out who might answer your question best.
Josh, I think you can.
Sure. Look, there's legal strategies that are at play, but one thing I can say in terms of who this complaint was filed against, we're looking for change from the people who have the levers of power to make change. So obviously the union is a powerful part of what goes on in policing in Rochester, but ultimately it's the mayor and it's the city that's in charge of the police department. And that's who we're looking to be the lever, be the catalyst for change here.
And I just had one more question. This one goes to Devora. I was really kind of struck by the instance where you were interacting with police during, I think it was the September 4th protest, where you said that you went to war, that you were, that you served the country in your deployments to protect free speech. So why do you think Devorah, for you, why is this so important for you to be involved in this, and what are you fighting for with this lawsuit?
I think it's very important because, like I said, for me, I spent 6 years fighting for this country that doesn't really fight for us. And I have kids to look after, and I won't be here for when my kids get to be my age. I may, but I may not be able to fight. So I'm fighting now because before my kids, my young boys walk out and become a statistic of the RPD, I would rather fight, put myself on the front line like I did in Iraq and in Afghanistan for this country that does not recognize me as I guess a citizen. I'm just a black person or a nigger.
Quick question, Patty Singer from Minority Reporter. Curious about the John Doe, Sally Sue, the people yet to be named. So as this lawsuit moves forward, will we see more names of officers? I think there were maybe half a dozen named now, but will there be more specific people named as it moves through?
Yes, so that is, legally we put that there as a placeholder. There will be more discovery that we get, more documents, use of force reports, body-worn camera footage. We certainly know that there are many, many other perpetrators in the RPD who could be named as defendants, but because we don't know exactly who right now, we've pled the John Does and the Sally Sues in place. And then for individual officers as laid out in the complaint, where we do know now who they were and what they did, we have named them as defendants.
So the suit will be amended as it goes forward?
That's generally the process, yes.
Thank you.
Hey, it's Carolyn Thompson at Associated Press. You mentioned, Katie, I think the reform plan, I think you called it toothless. And I wonder what maybe the top one or two things that you would have, that should have been included that would have convinced you that the reforms were being taken seriously this time around.
I mean, I think really our clients are better positioned to answer that with what they're looking for.
Yeah, I think a key piece is no plan to hold officers who were involved in the murder of Daniel Prude or Tyshawn Jones accountable. There was also intentional censoring of the recommendations made by the Police Accountability Board, who have spent countless hours, researching and learning about how to make our city safe and what public safety means in spite of the police department. So just even listening to the Police Accountability Board, who were democratically elected to fill this role and make recommendations to hold police officers accountable, but also make sweeping systemic changes in the police departments, would have been a start. I also think opening up the meetings to community members who wanted to attend would have showed some kind of good faith, some kind of initiative that they did in fact want to make changes, but having two closed-door secretive meetings with no minutes points to an intentional, continuous effort to evade accountability and to evade making systemic changes.
If there are no more questions.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming today. Everyone from the press, thank you to all of the plaintiffs who are here, who spoke. Thank you, Joe Prude, for coming and speaking and sharing the experiences that you went through. If anyone from the press wants to follow up with any of us, you have our contact information and we can talk later. Katie, is there anyone else in the room who has anything to say before we wrap up?
Justice for Daniel Prude.
Justice for Daniel Prude.
Okay. All right. Thank you all.
Yeah.